Welcome to Talks with Summer, seeing the world through the eyes of another. Today I have with me Andrea Lodico, a New York-based yoga teacher with over 800 hours of training and more than 2 decades of practice. Since 2004, yoga has been her grounding force in the fast pace of city life. Andrea teaches intelligently aligned, light-hearted vinyasa flow designed to build somatic awareness, presence, and empowerment. She completed her 200-hour certification at the Yoga Common, a 300-hour training at Boston Yoga School under Amy Wren and Kevin Courtney, and advanced certifications with the Sacred Fig Kul Yoga Project with Nikki Villela, and 3 Physio Yoga, a science-informed program blending yoga and physical therapy principles. Andrea now serves as the director of teacher training at the Yoga Common, leading both 200 and 300-hour programs. She also hosts regular domestic and international retreats and teaches annually at the Green Box Arts Festival in Colorado. Outside the yoga world, Andrea works as a producer and arts manager, collaborating with choreographers and dance companies. Thank you so much for coming today, Andrea. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Summer, for that lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you on this day in August, which feels very much like September. A little bit about myself. I will have to say, just hearing you, I wrote my bio, so I know what's in there, but hearing you share my bio was just a little bit overwhelming, and it just had me kind of pause and consider my evolution as a practitioner and as a teacher over the last 11 years. So it's kind of sweet to just have this moment to think about the way that this practice has shaped and informed my life and how it continues to do so. So thank you for that. And I guess to share a little bit about myself, my tiny dog, Mookie Wilson, is here with me and trying to get my attention. So hopefully he will settle down. But Mookie and I live with my very human partner, Nick Foster, in Brooklyn, in Fort Greene. And we've been in this neighborhood about 4 years, and I've fallen in love with it, having spent the bulk of my time living in New York around the Yoga Common, actually, in Murray Hill. And that's how I was first introduced to that space that has very much become my home. And as you mentioned, my work is really centered in the practice of yoga, but there are common threads between my work as a yoga teacher and my work in dance. I have a dance background. I danced my whole life. I studied dance at Connecticut College during my undergrad. In my professional life, I've worked behind the scenes in dance. So working to serve and support artists to ensure that their work can be seen and their work can be produced and their work can be experienced by audiences. My work right now is in deep partnership with the choreographer Larry Kegwin, and he and I have worked together for over 17 years, which is remarkable because I sometimes think he and I are both 25. So how is that even possible? But our work really centers on creating experiences for non-professional movers. So for people who may not think of themselves as dancers, and welcome them into the creative experience and the performance experience. And there's an aspect of that where we're asking people to step into a container of potential vulnerability and growth. And it's through that experience that people can develop a deeper connection to themselves, their creativity, and the world around them. And I see such commonalities in that work and the work that I do as a yoga teacher and a yoga teacher trainer, because when we're walking the path of yoga, it's one of connection, and it's one of connection both inward and to the world around us, the community at large.
So before I move on to the next question, I wanted to actually ask you something from that. When I was growing up, and I think in my teens, I was always what we say shy, and I never used to like to dance. And later on, I discovered how much I love it. And now I love to do it, and I participate when we have parties and things like that. But I want to know from your expertise for people who are listening. If you could share something or help them when people are scared to dance or people are afraid to dance or they're shy, what would you say to them which might be helpful to them to let go?
Well, I mean, that's such a great question. And what's been so interesting about this, my experience over the last several years working with people who may not think of themselves as movers, who may not think of themselves as dancers, certainly don't think of themselves as performers. You know, it starts with a lot of curiosity, a little bit of bravery, and a lot of trust. So to trust that we all have the capacity to move and feel freedom in our body. And it's about being, I think in a lot of ways, it's being in an environment that allows us to tap into that part of ourselves. So maybe it's a family wedding where you're surrounded by your loved ones, or maybe it's with your partner at your apartment and you like turn up the music and have a little dance party in your kitchen. But maybe it's an experience like, you know, participating in an event where you can be a part of a creative process and a performance. So yeah, I mean, just trust that you've got it in you. Turn on your favorite song and just dance it out.
Thank you so much. I'm sure this would be helpful. And I think I've been trying to feel the fact that the most important thing is, and you reiterated it today, is it's like a sign, is that the most important thing is trust. And I think without trust, it gets very difficult to go along and move forward on things in life.
Oh, absolutely.
So going back, I'm always curious about where your beginnings. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your childhood days.
Sure. So I grew up in upstate New York, in Albany. I have an older brother who's about 4 years older than I am, and my parents are extraordinary humans, and I would not be where I am today without their endless reservoir of love and support. So our childhood was one of a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of unconditional support, a lot of music. My parents are both, they're not musicians, but they grew up in the 60s. So it was a lot of, they always shared tons of music with us. So I always feel like when I think about my childhood, there always was like a soundtrack of all of those songs from the 60s. My dad's like a huge Beatles fan. So that, like, I always feel like that provided the soundtrack to our childhood. One of, I think, the formative experiences for me growing up is that after going to public elementary school, I went to an all-girls private school for middle school and high school, and called Albany Academy for Girls. And it transformed my life, and I think set me on the path that I'm able to walk today. We had a class of 30 young women in high school, and it really was an opportunity to receive incredible individualized support from teachers for each one of us as these unique, growing women aiming to carve out who we were in the world. And I had the opportunity, because it was so small, you didn't have to be the best of the best to play sports. You didn't have to be the best of the best to be a part of the musical theater production. And so I felt like I had the support and opportunity to try a myriad of things until I really found the things that I fell in love with, which was musical theater and dance. And I think it was that education and that level of mentorship and guidance, which I think gave me the confidence to be able to carve my own path moving forward.
What motivated you to do what you do? Or in other words, how did you take this path in life that you are on now?
So I was a dancer in college, and I knew when I graduated from college that I wasn't going to pursue a performance career. I think there's a part of me, as much as I deeply love the art form and I love moving and I love being a part of creative process, I am one that enjoys structure and enjoys stability. And so I was introduced to the business of dance through an internship when I was in college at the Paul Taylor Dance Company. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a thing. Like, I can work in the field of dance and work in support of this extraordinary art form and these incredible artists. And so it was that experience that led me down the path of my work as a producer. And when I graduated school, I found and moved to New York. I moved to New York right after I graduated college. And when I moved to New York, I found that I just kept going back to yoga studios. And I started going to the Yoga Common in 2004. So like when it first opened, I even maybe think that it was before Erica, our current owner, and Cynthia actually bought the studio. I think I went there right before they bought it. And then it continued as a yoga studio and now flourishes as the Yoga Common. And I found myself continually returning to the yoga studio, and it almost became beyond dance, my connection to my body, to my spirit. It allowed for me to feel a sense of grounding and calm, especially in those days of your early 20s where everything feels like a bit chaotic. And it became such a grounding force and anchor to my life in my 20s and 30s. And then in my 30s, so this was 11 years ago. So it was like my early 30s when I decided to do my first teacher training. And it was through the Yoga Common. And I only was going to do it at the Yoga Common because I felt so at home in that place, in that space. And when I entered into the teacher training, I knew that I loved yoga and I knew that I wanted to learn more, but I didn't necessarily know 100% that I wanted to teach. And then I share this story with our teacher trainees so frequently is that, you know, when entering into the program, you don't necessarily know that you need to teach because it's through the experience of learning the depth of the practice that an aperture can open. And that's where change can happen. And for me, I was in the teacher training. I was like, oh my, I'm like falling in love with this aspect of the practice and the idea of sharing this practice that has been so deeply meaningful and transformative to my life. And then I just never stopped. And so I started teaching very, very soon after I finished my teacher training. And what I think is just the gift of being a yoga teacher is that you get to be a forever student. And so, you know, as I continue to teach, I am always interested in moving deeper into the practice. And so I've continued my training over the last 11 years because I'm constantly, you know, my teaching evolves as one evolves. And so I've realized that as I've gotten older, there are different aspects of the practice that I wish to focus on. There are different ways that I'm seeking to understand the practice so I can better support my students. So yeah, that might be a very like long-winded way to answer your question, but that's sort of what has led me to this place. And now I have the honor of being able to lead the studio's teacher trainings, which is one of my favorite things to be able to do because yes, you know, during the 200-hour teacher training, you move through it, you gain the insight and knowledge, experience, and confidence to be able to teach a yoga class. Beautiful. But as, you know, if any of your listeners have done a 200-hour program, it's like they know it is so much more than that, that it provides this container for self-discovery and reflection and deep, deep inquiry where you're beginning to peel back the layers of self so you are able to step into your life with deeper clarity. And you just learn so much throughout that process.
I've personally seen that transformative journey with Ripple and how it impacted her. And I think I felt it as I listened it through her. So it just wasn't about yoga. It was so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, yeah, you can learn how to cue a student into triangle pose. Fantastic. But then you get this toolbox that's with you for the rest of your life that you are able to harness when you encounter challenge, when we're all in relationship with our siblings, with partners, with parents, with our work colleagues, that now you have this as a yoga practitioner, we have these tools through which to move through our relationships with, hopefully the aim is more clarity and more ease and more support.
So I'm sure that people who are listening, some of them know what yoga is, and then there'll be listeners who have no idea. So what is yoga really? How would you explain it to someone completely new?
Okay. It's so funny. You shared with me some questions in the prior to the interview, and I saw that question, and it's like, oh, it's such a simple question, but it's complex as well, because there's like, what is a yoga class, right? And what someone can preparing somebody for an encounter with a yoga practice in your typical Western yoga class, and then what is yoga. And what is yoga? Yoga means to yoke or to unify. And so the practice of yoga is an aim to integrate the disparate parts of ourself so we can just feel that a greater sense of balance, a greater sense of connection, both within ourselves and to the universal. And so that's yoga, right? And that might be cerebral for some, which is totally fine. But then in terms of, what you might expect in coming to a yoga class for the first time, what I always love is, as adults, we don't necessarily push ourselves to try something new all the time. And so I think it's so remarkable, and I applaud so many people for coming to a yoga studio for the first time to try something out, because that's a choice. And like, you can go move through your life and like stay comfortable and do your own thing, and fantastic. But to be able to make the choice to try something new, I think is so brave and so courageous. And when you come to a yoga class, you will have an experience depending on the studio you go to, depending on the teachers you're studying with, what their approach is, what their background is. But you can expect to have an experience where you move your body in a specific way and you connect with your breath. And the hope is that you roll up your mat, exit the studio, and you feel a little bit steadier, a little bit calmer, maybe with new insight into your current state, or perhaps certain habits that may have arisen as you were moving. But the aim is to bring deeper clarity, is to increase insight into self. And hopefully, having had that experience on your mat, you're able to access that when you're off of your mat.
Thank you, Andrea. That was so I have only taken yoga, some general classes and stuff, but this is so insightful to hear this from you. What's the most common misconception people have about yoga?
I would say most common misconceptions, I would say, is that you have to be flexible to be able to do yoga, or you have to have a certain kind of body type to do yoga, or that in general, some people feel that yoga is not for them. And on one hand, I don't think it's surprising that a lot of people feel that way, because I think it's indicative of the way our current landscape of media, influencers, etc., position the practice, and that people might not see themselves in that. They might not see people who look like them. And so that's why for me personally, and I can say this for the yoga comment as well, is that it's so important that as teachers, as say, if you're a studio owner, to create an environment where people feel welcomed, where people feel included, from the get-go. And that starts in walking through the threshold of a space. That starts with being welcomed by the teacher when you enter into the studio, and they greet you by your name, and they share what props you'll be using, and they are very clear about the map that they're laying out for the practice. And then through the practice itself, I think successful teachers in this regard are those who are precise and clear, inclusive with their language. So they're ensuring that they're creating an environment where anybody can step in and move their body and connect with their breath. And, I had someone in my class last week. She was new to the studio, and she did a couple of the poses, and then she sat on her mat quietly with her eyes closed the rest of the time. And for me, I'm like, beautiful, fantastic. Like, I want my students to feel supported with whatever kind of day they're having, that they could make that choice. And that's a fantastic choice if that's what they feel will benefit them on that specific day. And so in that way, like, my hope is that this misconception that you have to be flexible, you have to have a thin body, you have to look a certain way, you have to have expensive clothing, blah, blah, you have to have a yoga mat. No, it's like, especially at home, it's like, you can just, roll up in your jammies, live stream from home, and like, do your thing, use hardcover books for your blocks, use cans of soup for, another kind of prop, use your belt from your pants for a strap. It's like, there's all different ways in.
Can you talk a little bit more about how can yoga be used for personal growth and healing?
Well, I speak to this both from a personal perspective and what I have witnessed by guiding the 200-hour teacher training, because I think that the effect of the practice is much clearer in containers like that, in containers like the teacher training, when you have the luxury of time, dedicated time and space to immerse yourself in the practice. But as I was speaking to before, what the yoga practice offers, and particularly the Yoga Common really is anchored. We do a lot of work and a lot of study of Patanjali's 8-limbed path. And what the 8-limbed path offers is a set of tools through which to guide the way you move through the world. So to help guide your relationship with yourself, to help support clear relationships with others. And to the degree through the process of the yamas, which help to frame relationship with others, the niyamas, which help to frame relationship with self, through pranayama, control of the breath, through asana, movement of the body, or just sitting still, that it can help you get to a state of meditation, concentration, so you can ultimately experience that kind of union that we spoke about. So integrating the disparate parts of yourself. And that's the path. That's the 8-limbed path. But what I like to say in my 200-hour teacher training program, I have this infographic that I made that shows the 8 limbs and shows all these crisscrossing, intersecting lines from one limb to another limb to another, another limb to another. It's called a path, but it's not a path, right? We don't move through one step and put a big check mark next to it. All of these limbs are in constant relationship with one another, and they inform one another. So we are practicing all of these limbs at the same time so that we can ultimately, and this is the end game, like the ultimate thing is that we want to move through life with more ease. And so what I feel is by harnessing these tools, and this has been true to myself, is that I rely on these tools to encounter challenge with more ease. And I say this to my teacher trainees too, is that there can be, talking about misconceptions, there can be this misconception that like as a yogi, like we are Zen, we are undisturbed, we move through life with like just steady. And that's not the case. And practicing yoga, focusing on the 8 limbs, for instance, is not a practice of putting your head in the sand and ignoring the complexities of the world, ignoring the heartache. And like this moment that we're collectively living through right now, it is abundant with heartache. So none of this is saying we're going to ignore this and like everything is great because we're calm and zen. It's like, no, let us use these tools to clear our own lens so we can step into challenge with more clarity, so we can be of service. So really, like, that's the goal. It's like the aim is to be of service to others, to be of service to our communities, to enact community care. And it's so much, it's about personal liberation, but it's about collective liberation. And so there is a connection to social justice as well. And so I just like sort of spoke in a circular way, but I think it's yes about personal healing, but it's also about healing ourselves and creating clarity for ourselves with our own shit, for lack of a better word, so we can aim to be of service to those around us.
Okay, moving on to your personal life a little bit. Is there any incident which you would like to share which shaped your life?
Oh goodness. I mean, it's like, how do I select just one? I will say that, for me in particular, I would say I did a advanced teacher training, my 300-hour teacher training with Boston Yoga School in 2016, 2017, and guided by Amy Wren and Kevin Courtney. And that program, the way it was structured, was over 10 months. So it was a September through May program, and it was 1 weekend a month. And it was, for me, it really created the container to be able to move through that year of my life. And that program was populated by 24 women. And it wasn't purposeful. Amy would have accepted men if there had been those interested that year. But it just so happened that it included 24 like really powerful, smart, bright women. And when I look back on that year and I think about both the yoga that was happening in the context of the program and just the relationships that were formed during that program. And for me personally, I was moving through the final stages of my divorce, and it created just this incredible support system to move through this massive transition for myself personally. And I think without which it would have been that much more difficult. But I also think for me, it really crystallized the fact that, my work as a yoga teacher, as a facilitator in the creation of experiences for people to connect deeply with themselves, that's really my heart's work.
Who has been the most influential person in your life and how have they impacted you?
I'd say my parents. So Marguerite and Phil Lodico, little shout out. I don't know what I did in a past life to deserve them, but they are just extraordinary. So they are high school sweethearts. And they've been married for now 54 years. And so they not only, as I mentioned before when we were talking about my childhood, they not only raised my brother and myself with an abundance of love and unconditional support, but it's their example of relationship, of partnership, of marriage that helps guide me, as I move through my own partnership, and their example of deep love for one another, but also they had the, fortitude and, support system themselves for my grandparents, that they were both the first of their families to go to college. And they both moved into careers that they were deeply passionate about. So my mom was a college professor and my dad was an attorney. And by their example, it was never a question for me that I would move into work that I was deeply passionate about. It was never like, oh, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to clock in, clock out. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But for me, I think having the example of my parents who poured their soul and their hearts into their work, and seeing for me that was not just possible, but it was just their day to day. So it didn't feel like a far off stretch to be able to do that. And so I think having them as an example for me was, I think, quite transformative in my ability to move forward in this way. My work is very freelance. So I work with one choreographer, Larry, that provides an anchor to my work. I'm a yoga teacher. I teach group classes. I lead the teacher training. I run retreats. But it is like a juggling act. It's a hustle. But for me, it's like, I know that this is possible, and I have the trust that this is possible because of the example that my parents gave me in their work and making their hearts work, their careers.
This just reminded me of something very funny I just saw yesterday, coincidentally. And because I also do not want to get fit into the 9 to 5. And I saw this meme where it said that to avoid the 9 to 5, I work 90 hours per week.
Yes, exactly. And there are trade-offs. My partner, Nick, who's fantastic, he is a former chef. So he was a chef for 20 years in upstate New York, owned his own restaurant. He's incredibly talented. But as many folks know, the life of a chef is fairly unsustainable. And he decided about 10 years ago to make the shift to working in civil service. So he works for New York State. He works in the Department of Labor, Unemployment Appeals Office. I think I got all of that right. So he has a very 9 to 5 job, right? He clocks in and clocks out, and he has all of this spaciousness on, the either side of his day. And there are true benefits to that, especially for him having been on the other side of busting his butt for decades and years for his craft and his creativity. And then for me, it's like, it's this hustle. I have all these spreadsheets that track all of my different revenue streams and my classes and my work. And when I, look at my calendar each day, I've got to remind myself which day it is and where I'm going. So yes, I can absolutely relate to that meme.
Is there any advice you would give your younger self looking back at your life now?
I don't know if there's a single piece of advice I would give my younger self, because I feel lucky in that I don't have many regrets or any regrets. And I feel like the challenges that I have encountered have shaped my path to date. And I am very content with where I am. And so my advice to my younger self would just be to trust in yourself.
What do you feel the purpose of life is for you? Or in other words, what do you feel is your personal quest in life?
I mean, my quest in life, I think it's an interesting question, because I do think it may be something that evolves and shifts as we ourselves evolve and age, and our perspectives change and our priorities change. But I would say, my quest in my life right now is to live a life that's wholehearted and abundant with love and abundant with creativity and collaboration, and rich in communities that allow for that, and that invite me to be able to do the work that I hold so dear. And that's one of, guiding folks to be able to have an experience with themselves that leaves them feeling more empowered, more grounded, and with more clarity.
Is there any book, quote, or philosophy that has shaped your outlook on life?
I mean, I have a huge yoga library that is probably overflowing at this point. I mean, there are books that I return to again and again. One is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and that I find is one that I tend to read and reread just as a pathway to connect to that part of ourselves that is unchanging and that is undisturbed by the variances of stress and challenge. But I'll say, one thing that I hold really dear, I mentioned my dear friend and collaborator, Larry Kegwin, an extraordinary choreographer. And he and I have worked together for over 17 years. And I've learned so much from him. And one of the things that he does that I think is extraordinary is when he walks into a room, he has this way of being that invites everybody to feel at ease and to feel supported and to feel like they can be their best creative selves. And he really works to excavate the strengths and the talents of everybody in a room, whether he's working with professional dancers, whether we're having an administrative meeting, or whether we're working with our community member casts. And he walks into each room with such a sense of joy and positivity and lightness. And having worked with him for so long, I really take that to heart, and I aim to integrate that into my work as well.
How would you describe your teaching philosophy or approach?
I mean, I think this kind of comes through with what we've been talking about so far. Is when I teach a yoga class, I aim to create a space for students to have an experience where they can sense the connection between their mind, body, and spirit. And what that means in practical terms is that I offer a class in an intelligently aligned vinyasa flow. So we move in a way that allows us to access our breath, but we move in a way that is clear, that is supported, and that is very intentional and precise. So in that way, I think precision can be really powerful for students, because I think so many folks who come to a yoga class, they're there because they want to be guided, and they want to know where to put their hand. They want to know where to put their foot. They want to know how to move their bodies through space. And so I think as teachers, I think it's really, really vital that we use a level of precision to help guide students into shapes through transitions. And we use language that's invitational. So I always aim, we talked about inclusivity and accessibility before. So my aim is, even in my precise language, I'm always offering an invitation to explore. So it's like your shape can look different than your friend's shape, because we're all walking in with different bodies. And so I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge the variances that come in body shape, size, injury, whatever it can be, through my teaching and through my language.
If it were an ideal world, what does that look like in your eyes?
Oh. I mean, what a question for this moment, right? I mean, an ideal world would be one where we don't minimize each other's suffering. And it's a world where everyone is supported and loved and encouraged to thrive. everybody.
So before I move on to the last question, I wanted to ask you something, and I hope I can articulate this well. So I know yoga comes from the East, and there's so many things in life. This is my personal opinion, so I've tried to put this in words that we take things from each other, and we take the strengths, and it's added so much. And I'm that person who believes that it's so good that things go from one place to another, and we can share that knowledge. But I've often heard also the naysayers or people who frown upon this. And what would you say to that factor, the Eastern science coming to the West? Or is there an aspect which you don't like, which has been westernized? Or I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that.
No, it's a really, really great question. And it is one that's on my mind because I'm preparing to teach the history of yoga session for our next 200-hour teacher training cohort. For me, I think it is vital to teach, and especially when you're teaching people to be teachers, that it's vital to teach yoga from a strong foundation in its roots in the East. So to teach from historical texts, so to teach from the Yoga Sutras, to teach from the Gita. And I think it's so, so important that those things, those texts and that history is threaded through students' understanding of the practice. That being said, yoga has evolved so much over the past, in particularly like 150 years. And obviously centuries before that. And for the past 150 years, it's evolved in its dialogue with the West. And there are ways that the practice has shifted because it's in response to our contemporary way of being. And I speak to this having just moved through this advanced teacher training last year. You mentioned Three's Fizzy Yoga. And it in particular was a focus on, it's led by women who are yoga teachers and physical therapists. So they're looking at asana through the lens of exercise science and biomechanics, because you might pick up a light on yoga book and look at the photos of Iyengar doing certain asana, doing certain shapes that would not be biomechanically sound over a long period of time if you were to do them every day. And I think it's so important that there are aspects like that the practice evolves so we can support our very modern contemporary selves as we move through the world today. Because ultimately, we just want to be moving more sustainably for longer. We want to be able to do our yoga practice. I mean, I speak for myself. I want to be able to do my yoga practice, even if it looks very, very differently when I'm 70, when I'm 80, maybe beyond. We'll see if I get lucky. So I think in that way, I think there are important aspects where the yoga practice must evolve. But I do think it's so important that our work is rooted in yoga's history and yoga's foundation in the East.
What are you currently excited about or exploring in your yoga journey?
I love that question. Well, one of the things that's an anchor to my work as a yoga teacher is that I run retreats. So I am gearing up for a retreat on the west coast of Ireland, and that's happening in just like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, very soon. And for me, leading retreats in these beautiful places is such a gift of the work that I do, because it offers both me and the students the luxury of time in being together. So it's about the yoga that happens on the mat. We practice once or twice a day, depending on the day. So it's certainly about that. And it's having the practices informed by the beautiful setting where we are. But it's having delicious meals together. It's going for a hike in the woods. It's having a boat ride. It's getting a taste of the history and the culture of the place. And so I really look forward to crafting more of those experiences, because I think they can be so powerful as they allows students to step out of the day-to-day hustle of their lives and intentionally move into a container of practice and community. And they inevitably return home changed to a certain degree. And I just think I've been a student on retreat many, many times. And I just think it's such a vital it's such a vital way to become more connected to your practice and just a wonderful way to meet like-minded people. For my own studentship, I'm getting ready to begin a meditation teacher training with Tracy Stanley. And she's an extraordinary teacher. She's rooted in I have this written down because I don't want to butcher it at all. She's rooted in the techniques of the Sri Vidya Tantra and the Himalayan masters. And so I've had the opportunity to taste a little bit of that work through my studentship with Kevin Courtney. And I just love to be a student. And I think when I am a student, I am a better teacher for it. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that's coming up in October.
What is something that you would like the world to know about you, which you feel is often misunderstood?
It's such an interesting question. I mean, I don't know what's misunderstood about me because I am very much an open book, and I really seek to move through the world in a way that invites engagement and that invites exchange and dialogue and connection.
From your entire journey in life so far, what would you like to share with our listeners, which you feel would be helpful to them?
I would say aim to try something in the next 6 months that you've never done before. So, whether that's taking a yoga class, whether that's signing up for a different kind of class that you've never done before. For me, where I've experienced the most joy and sense of connection and sense of self is when I have put myself in a situation that scares me a little bit. And that is teacher training for sure. Any kind of teacher training there's an element of that. My partner, Nick, he's always written, like journaled and things like that, but he's getting ready to try his first stand-up comedy open mic next week. And I mean, I think that's so incredibly brave. And whether that's your open mic comedy is your thing or whatever it is, I just hope people try something new and that maybe it'll surprise them and maybe they'll fall in love with something.
Thank you so much, Andrea. This has been most wonderful. And the only thing which I would like to say is that I feel your joy and the light you bring to, I'm sure, to a lot of students. But behind that, I can see your sense of clarity and your sense of purpose. So thank you for being extraordinary and doing this podcast. And I wish you the best.
Oh, my goodness, Summer. This was such a joy. And I love that you're doing this podcast and being able to offer your listeners these conversations with all sorts of wonderful people. And I'm honored to be included in that. So thank you. Thank you. It was really nice chatting with you and getting to know you. And I hope to see you soon.